Well, welcome everybody. I'm here to introduce Jennifer Manning and to just admit a bit of nepotism. She is related to me. She's my daughter. That said, she has worked in procurement many places, in New Zealand, in the oil patch, in Calgary, and she's now essentially running import and export of stuff for TELUS, which all of these are challenges at the best of times. And I talked to her and realized she had some things she might be able to tell us about how you handle this. I never cease to be amazed that I can get fresh fruit from Peru for $2 on my table. And even now that's happening. So Jen, over to you. How the hell does that work?
Well, it's both very complicated and very simple. So today I'm going to provide an overview of global supply chains, both how they normally function and also what's happening right now when we have times of pandemic going on and there's other interruptions too. Anyways, I subtitled this because everybody pretty much has been impacted earlier in the year from shortages of toilet paper. So one of the cases I'm going to run through is toilet paper. And I'll also address the blueberries too. So along with a couple of okay. Okay. So just to provide a basis for the discussion, so I wanted to just give an overview of what a supply chain is and what it's generally composed of. There's a number of different organizations, professional ones, that have different definitions of what a supply chain is. They all tend to have a couple of variances on them or definitions, but it boils down to this. So your supply chains generally include demand, so identifying demand and planning for it. So how much people are going to want to buy or are going to want to use of something or how much they need. So demand identification. And where are you going to get it from? So that's sourcing. Okay, and also how, that goes into price, how much, all sorts of interesting things. How are you going to get it from where you bought it to where you need to use it or where somebody's going to use it? So that's your logistics, so point A to point B. Then when you get it there, how much you're going to have to pay with regards to other things. So you're talking taxes and tariffs and duties and import and export compliance and all sorts of really interesting stuff that governments want to do in order to ensure that things play out a certain way or to collect monies with regards to products. Okay, then there's actually receiving the materials when they get to where they're going. So some things are easier to actually take off of a boat than other things. Other things are easier to physically bring into your warehouse or put on the shelf than other things. So something really interesting in Dubai that they did, it's not available in North America at this point, but you can actually walk into a shopping mall in Dubai and you can use a vending machine in order to buy a high-end sports car. Only in Dubai. But the complexities of actually getting that car into a vending machine and then, providing people with, I don't know whether they do it on very large Visa cards, I'm not sure, but somehow inserting payment so that then you get dispensed a Ferrari. It's a lot different than the basket of apples in Ontario comes from the farmer to the farmer's market, and then you grab the apple and go eat them. So it's a little different. Material management and inventory. So for those who have shopped at Costco, it's laid out like a huge warehouse. They don't have an additional area in the back that they keep things. They just bring them in, put them on the shelf. That's a materials management strategy. They've chosen to do it like that. Walmart, on the other hand, they have giant centralized cross-docking or hub stations in various areas. So warehouses that you can't walk into and buy stuff from. What they do is they bring all their products in and then they feed them out kind of like a hub and spoke on a wheel to the Walmarts in your area. So there are giant centralized warehouses in certain spots that feed the Walmarts for a select area. They manage their inventories as such. They make sure that the Walmart in Ottawa is getting the right amount of materials versus the Walmart in Montreal. So that's materials management and inventory and keeping shelves stocked for people to be able to buy stuff. And there's something called reverse logistics. So if you buy something from, let's say, Amazon or Wayfair, and you don't like it, okay, it's wrong good, it's the wrong part, it falls apart, okay, you have to do a return, okay. That's part of reverse logistics. The other part is when companies will ask for you to um, send stuff back to them on purpose. So, for example, you go buy a bottle of wine at the store, okay? Right now you pay a deposit, and that's to make you think about not throwing out the bottle. They want you to bring the bottles back to them, and then they take the bottle and then they send it for glass recycling or reuse. That's on purpose. That whole cycle there is called reverse logistics. Okay. Then on the back end, there's waste management. So when I say waste, it doesn't just mean garbage. So things that go into the landfill or end up as garbage on the side of the road. Okay, so it's anything that is not used or consumed. So it can be, we're talking about waste. We're talking about, we're going to go back to that case of that bottle of wine. So technically the bottle is waste. You're not going to consume the bottle. You're not going to sit down and say, yes, I'm going to have myself a nice plate of bottle for dinner. Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to take it back, okay, and then they're going to take that glass, they're going to send it to a glass recycler, and then it's going to get ground up and used for something else. So it can be used to make another glass bottle, it can be used to make a glass base, it can be used to potentially make Corningware or fiber optic cable. So that is actually waste and waste diversion. That's part of the strategy. And companies will usually want to do waste diversion for a couple of reasons. One is it makes them look good, so social image. The other one is it actually saves them money. So the less waste you have, the more you can do it on the back end, you can actually make a small bit of money back. So hence, that's why you generally want to do waste diversion. It will actually make your company money in many cases. And then there's other steps as well. So, but it's all kind of the bits and pieces that fit in between there. But in general, that's what your supply chains include. So everything from identifying the demand down to fulfilling the demand, okay, and dealing with the waste at the end of the process. So that's your supply chain front to back. Most of the general activities. There's other bits and variants in there. It depends upon what product you're looking at, what area, what industry, but that tends to be the main ones. And by the way, if you're wondering, that picture, that's actually, that's the North Shore of Vancouver. That's one of their old loading docks for loading cranes for the fishermen's boats that would come through. They've restored it. It's not a working crane anymore, but you can go down and visit it if you're ever in the North Shore of Vancouver. All right. Okay, so when supply chains work well, okay, it means that you get what you're looking for. Okay, so it means that there's the right amount of production happening and there's the right amount of demand occurring. It all balances out like a big scale. Okay, so ideally, I'll take the case of the Peruvian blueberries. So there's a demand for blueberries in countries that can't produce fresh blueberries, especially in winter months. Okay, you can't grow a blueberry in Canada profitably during the winter. Putting them in greenhouses doesn't work. They don't like that. So instead, in many cases, especially in winter, we import them. Okay, you can still get them season round, but you import them. So there's a demand. People want blueberries. Okay. Supply. Generally, what supermarkets will do, or conglomerations or co-ops of supermarkets or wholesale buyers, is they will go looking for blueberries globally. They happen to find, blueberries in Peru. Blueberries in Peru are cheap. Why are they cheap? They're cheap because the cost of labor in Peru is probably pretty cheap. And some of that comes down to your currency. So how much Peruvian dollars to the Canadian dollar? That's a pretty good bargain or a pretty good deal. How much is a farmer generally expected to make growing blueberries in Peru? It's probably going to be cheaper than a farmer in, let's say, Britain growing blueberries. I'm not sure if you can grow blueberries in Britain, but the pound versus the Canadian dollar, there is a big difference in between the two. Okay. Also, I'm going to say, unfortunately, this is why you've got to look around and check regarding socioeconomic status. Sometimes the labor practices in countries varies. So your Peruvian farmer may also not be paid as much for their blueberry because of labor standards in the country. Also the methods that they use, and also potentially to the other factors involved. So it can include, yeah, they're using pesticides in their blueberries. They're ones that are banned in Canada, but boy, are they cheap. So this is why you got to watch what you buy and understand where it comes from and what goes into it. So anyways, how does it still become so cheap? The next steps up the supply chain. So the next steps up from there would be the farmer grows it. Okay. Then it usually will go to a wholesale market. Okay. And then it'll go on to a carrier of some sort. So some things get shipped by boat, some things get shipped by air, some things get shipped by train, some things get shipped by land. Generally, high value perishable materials, low weight, will tend to go air freight. More bang for your buck. This is why you'll get fresh cut flowers from Colombia. So if they can charge $5 for a rose, okay, it's worthwhile putting that rose, which is going to be perishable, on a plane to get it to you in February. So anyways, your blueberries actually, they will tend to go, of all things, they'll tend to go by sea. And what they'll do is they'll buy space along with other produce in a refrigerated container, and they'll put it on a boat. Usually blueberries are picked when they're not quite ripe, pretty close to it, goes in the container. Then it goes, doesn't go terribly fast, doesn't go terribly slow, but it makes its way up from South America to North America. At which point, then it gets disembarked along with all the other stuff in there in the large refrigerated container. Okay, then it goes to a distribution center, and then it goes to your end buying entities, so your supermarkets. Okay, so where the most of your markups occur actually along the way is going to be on the distributor and on the freight. So that's going to be the main cost adding up to your price of blueberries. And then it's at the supermarket. And at which point too, what supermarkets will sometimes do as well to make you come in the door and buy more stuff, sometimes they'll do something called loss leader pricing. So, you know, the racks at the end of the supermarket shelf, or where they put things on special, where it seems crazy cheap. Okay, that's on purpose. It's to make you walk into the store, you see that, you buy that, and then you keep on walking down the aisle and putting more stuff into your cart. They're called loss leaders. So the supermarket doesn't make profit on it, but it's in order to make you come in the door and then buy more stuff that does have a better profit margin on it. So anyways, that's how blueberries from Peru work. So pretty nifty. Okay, supply chain disruption. So all it takes is one element out of that entire chain to break, and you're going to have a disruption occur. So it can include, let's say, a frost or a snow kills all of the blueberries in Peru. Okay, we had a case like this with cauliflower happen a couple years ago, where you could buy an $8 head of cauliflower. And why did that happen? Well, it's because snow or frost, unexpected, killed all the cauliflower in California. So what happened is, all of a sudden your production capacity goes down, your availability of raw product is no longer there. Uh-oh. Okay. Does this mean you can't ship it anymore? No, you can still ship it. Your transport's okay. Does it mean that people are going to buy more cauliflower? Probably not. But when people want it, it's not there. So what does this mean? It means a rarity in the market of cauliflower. So if you want a fresh cauliflower and there aren't that many available, you're going to have to settle for cauliflower that's either misshapen, maybe a little bit off, you know, or you're going to have to pay more for it because now there's a shortage. And when there's a shortage, that tends to drive up demand. So that's how you end up with the $8 head of cauliflower. Now, people are smart though. A lot of people didn't buy that $8 head of cauliflower, because what they did was they adapted. So your consumers instead said, well, why can't I use frozen cauliflower that got frozen 5 months ago? So instead. Or, I really don't want cauliflower this time, I'm going to go with broccoli. Or, maybe just plain old won't have cauliflower for the next while. I'll have something else. Okay. So that's what happened is demand then adjusted. So people no longer said, I no longer want fresh cauliflower. That then balanced out the production capacity, and then things leveled out again up until you were able to have lots of fresh cauliflower available. So that's what happened in the case of cauliflower. Now, pandemics do even more interesting things. So I'm going to bring up the next slide here, and I'll talk to that. I do have a question, though, of our moderators. Do we want to stop and address questions, or did you want me to keep going? How did you want to do this?
We will ask people who have specific questions to write them in the chat.
Okay.
And we'll go through them at the end. But if people have things that are pressing right now, you can certainly write that in the chat room. And if it looks like it's pertinent to right now, we can always introduce you. We normally ask people to wait till the end.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so pandemics do really interesting things to supply chains. It creates big imbalances in really weird areas, and it really depends upon the product too, with regards to where it impacts and how, although there are some trends that kind of go across the board. So I've taken consumer products mostly to take a look at how this impacts, and some of it's going to make a lot of sense here. So what we've seen happen with regards to a couple of select products and the pandemics, a couple of things. So you probably noticed that all of a sudden, going back to March, April, when COVID first hit, people all of a sudden started buying and hoarding toilet paper. Costco had limits on how much you could buy. You could not walk in there and walk out with 5 shopping carts worth of toilet paper. Okay, hand sanitizer, disposable masks. Okay, huge demand for that. Other ones, laptops. Okay, work from home equipment such as cameras for doing video conferences. Other things as well, certain baking materials, baking goods, things to bake with. So all that went up as well, board games. And there are a couple of other spots too that really big impact with regards to all of a sudden high demand. Now, the question is, where did this demand come from? Okay, and because if what happens is you have too much demand, there won't necessarily be enough supply to meet that demand if all of a sudden it goes up. And as a result, you're going to have shortages. A lot of this high demand was driven by specific factors. So the laptops are easier to explain than toilet paper. The laptops were, all of a sudden, you had employers who were pretty much telling their employees, and schools that were pretty much telling their kids, universities telling the university students, you have to work from home. For health and safety reasons, you have to work from home. Okay, if you're working from home, most people, it means that you're going to be on a computer. If previously you've been working off of your phone or an iPad and did not have a laptop or did not have a computer, guess what you're going to be buying? Okay, or if there's the expectation that you're online and have a high quality video, needing a video camera that goes with that, then all the accessories, so computer mice, certain types of expansion chips, those types of things, telecommunication equipment, upgrades to internet, all the rest of that. So all this, the demand just skyrocketed suddenly, and your manufacturers like Apple and Hewlett-Packard and those folks, they hadn't a clue this was coming. They couldn't have seen it coming. So all of a sudden, any stock that was available, it's cleaned out. Now, with these folks, it takes them a while in order to ramp up their production to meet demand. Okay, so they've taken the past couple of months, you're finding this better, less blank store shelves, or when you go and click on the Apple site, you're not seeing, oh, they don't have any MacBooks. Okay, it's taken them a while to ramp up production. The other thing too that's happened is now that production is occurring, demand is dropping because people are now getting their laptops, they're now getting their accessories, so it's balancing out again. So that's what happened with electronic goods. Okay. Toilet paper was different. Toilet paper is more almost psychology. So when people feel uncertain or when they feel threatened about their environment, what they'll do is they'll think, well, what do I need in order to survive with my family or myself for months on end? So if you think back to what you read about the Cuban Missile Crisis, when they were telling people, please have X amount of supplies at home to survive a nuclear crisis, that's what happened with the toilet paper. Now, because there's such a variety of canned goods and other staples available on the market, people may have been buying a little bit extra, so a little bit here, a little bit there, but it wasn't all of a sudden the aisle of beans was cleaned out because there was such a variety of canned materials. So you weren't seeing people going out the door with months of canned materials or canned food. But toilet paper, okay, there are only a certain amount of brands of toilet paper available on the market. So what did people do in order to think that they needed to survive for 3 months, similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis? They went and they bought toilet paper. So psychologically, they would feel safe in case Armageddon hit. So that's what happened with toilet paper. And of course, because there's only a certain number of suppliers of toilet paper on the market. Toilet paper is not a growing market, by the way, unless you're in a place that is introducing indoor plumbing. Like India is starting to have more middle class, so less outhouses, more toilets, more toilet paper. Okay, so unless you're in a growing market like that, there's usually not much demand all of a sudden for paper materials. So the market had been stagnant for decades. And all of a sudden, they're just getting bombarded with humongous amount of demand and they can't ramp up. And if you're curious, the Canadian connection to this is there are two main paper and pulp mills in Canada that produce all of the raw stock for toilet paper production in North America. One in Quebec, one in BC. So the raw material supply all of a sudden had to ramp up. So that's a good news if you're a logger out in BC or in Quebec. It's bad news since you have a bottleneck at those raw paper and pulp manufacturing facilities in Quebec and BC. You're going to have to add on additional shifts while keeping COVID in mind. And that often means that you have to have less people in the factory at the same time. You can add more shifts. The shifts can't cross though. Okay, and you've got to keep the place really clean. So guess what? Your costs have just gone up as a result. So anyways, we've now had, things have leveled out, same as the laptop. So people are now happy. They have the level of toilet paper that they need. The factories have ramped up. They now have additional shifts on. They have more material coming in. They're producing more toilet paper and paper products. You've probably seen the commercials on television from, I think it's Scotty's or somebody else saying, we've got enough toilet paper. We're cranking the stuff out like crazy. Okay, they are. So that's what's happened with the toilet paper. So really interesting phenomena, but it also brings about the fact that you will have bottlenecks that happen. Okay, and these can be crucial bottlenecks with regards to your supply chain. So anyways, that's what's happened there. As a result too, demand has also gone down in certain areas and we're not sure when we're going to see a recovery. So these businesses are going to have to find a way to adapt or unfortunately they're going to go under. So for example, if you're looking for movie popcorn right now, you are not going to be able to find movie popcorn because that's produced at movies and nobody's going to see movies right now. Movie theaters themselves, it's not looking too good. Okay. On the other hand, Netflix, Amazon, your other streaming services, they're loving it right now. Because guess what we're doing when we're not going and seeing movies? We're staying home. We're watching their streaming services. Okay, three-piece suits. Okay, if you're working from home, even bankers working from home, you have no need to wear a three-piece suit. Okay, so sales of things like three-piece suits, nope. Is it going to come back? I'm not so sure. You know, you might still be able to sell suits for weddings, although it's going to be you and your 6 closest friends getting married, or hopefully not to each other, but anyways, there's you and a very small circle, so the amount of suits that's going to be sold, very limited. Okay. So other things that have impacted by the pandemic is there's been change to logistics as a whole. So getting things from A to B, and that's because of change in patterns of, again, how much to go on the boat or the plane or the train by how much. So Um, what you're going to find, and Canada Post is warning of this already, is that because people are having to send things to each other remotely versus drop it off, okay, or go to, let's say, go to a store and buy something instead you're ordering it online. That is really crunching Canada Post, FedEx, UPS, all your companies like this. They're seeing the volumes that they're seeing right now is just crazy. If you check out the job postings in your area, it's guaranteed there's going to be postings for Amazon delivery driver, because they are just going like crazy. Again, it's a demand and a supply imbalance that's going to have to work itself out. So anyways, if you're thinking about sending Christmas cards or parcels to anybody, I'm recommending sooner rather than later, just because of the volume going through, because people don't shop stores much anymore. So hence they're buying it online and they're shipping it. Okay. This is also causing bottlenecks in other areas and all sorts of products. So stuff's coming through. It's just taking longer because of the overall volume, and it's impacting all over the place. So it's a heads up on that one. The other thing too is just general constraints as well. So both the great thing and the drawback to so much shipping and stuff going on is you have to bring more people on in order to help you. You can automate some of this, but there's limitations. The problem is when you have more people together, there's a greater chance of people getting COVID. When they have a case of COVID, it means the entire FedEx facility is shut down for 3 days. They actually had an incident about a month back where they had to shut down the FedEx facility in Mirabel and clean the entire thing over 3 days before they could reopen again. And if your parcel was sitting there waiting to be sent somewhere else in their centralized cross-docking facility, okay, you would have had to have waited. Okay. So also other things right now that COVID is impacting, Canada Post and their union has put in place that they will not touch your parcel for 3 days once it ends up in their facility. They do that so that it kills any risk of contaminated COVID germs getting to their workers. So your mail right now is going to be a lot slower. Express Post is not really Express Post much any longer. So that's why they've taken away the service guarantees. So there's general constraints with regards to logistics right now occurring. So they are working again to try to better this, but it's taking time. So again, there are additional shifts, but never the two shall cross or meet. Automation improvements, those take longer to put in place. They're looking at alternate ways of doing things, but again, it's taking time to adapt. So, okay. All right. Other things impacting, so how you're managing the stuff on the shelf. So problems that supermarkets had was people would go in there and then they clean out the entire shelf. So what's happened since that time is you've probably seen little signs when you go to the grocery store, like on things like hand sanitizer, where it's limit 2 per family. That's an allocation system. So it means you can't come in and grab all you want, because the problem is it would then cause a whole bunch of problems upstream with regards to demand. So if somebody came into Montreal, let's say the Montreal, I don't know, IGA supermarket, okay, or Metro, they took all the hand sanitizer off the shelf and took it home for their use of their friends and their closest family. That would mean that everybody else wouldn't have any, and then all of a sudden the main warehouse that supplies the hand sanitizer, and then upstream from there, the hand sanitizer company would end up in a stock out position, and they have to try to ship the stuff as quick as they can to that supermarket. So it would create almost a false urgency because of that. So instead, that they've moved to an allocation model, and on a lot of hot stuff right now, they have moved to that allocation model. Okay, and it's all along the way. The other thing too they found is maybe having stuff made overseas right now in certain areas is not a good thing, or depending upon one source somewhere not near you. So you're seeing right now a couple of trends. One is onshoring. So where previously, we relied upon, oh, the stuff's made in China and I'll get in a week once I place my order. Okay, companies are making decisions instead to have warehouses or centralized points where they're holding stuff. So that this way they're getting around constraints. If all of a sudden a high demand comes from one area or the other, they can fill it. So they're sitting on stuff, they're stockpiling. The other one is onshoring. So previously where they'd said, yeah, it's overseas, it's okay. Instead, they're onshoring it. And one of the prime industries right now that we're seeing doing that is with health and personal protective equipment. So previously, we relied upon a lot of companies like 3M or other companies as well to produce various health and safety equipment, and then we just have it shipped across the border and fulfill that requirement. Okay. Not such a great idea right now because the demand is so high nationally in those countries that the needs being met before the stuff even leaves. And in many cases, governments will implement the help yourself first before you help others policy. So whether it's in China, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Europe, they'll say, no, feed local demand first, and then you're allowed to ship out. Or what they'll do is come in and they'll take that material and have it all for themselves. So building at least local limited capacity in those cases there is a bright move. It feeds a demand. It actually creates work. It stabilizes your supply chain. So this is why you're seeing companies like Bauer Hockey Equipment. They're creating face shields. So they switched their line. They're now creating with a government grant face shields. This is why we're seeing hand sanitizer in that. Local breweries actually who would have possibly seen a decline in sales, especially if they had a microbrew restaurant attached onto it. The restaurant's not going to be very functional right now. Instead, if they switch to manufacturing hand sanitizer, there we go. You've just onshored that requirement. You know, we may have previously imported Purex from China. Guess what? We're now manufacturing the equivalent of Purex locally. So that's the onshoring move. So those changes happen with regards to materials management and inventory. So onshoring and allocation systems and stockpiling. The other thing that's happened, both good or bad, is when you have to put new processes in place, you have to change to a new methodology, you're usually not very efficient. As a result, you create waste. So it can be wasted time, wasted materials, actually garbage itself, okay? So as a result right now, what you're probably seeing is just plain old on the street, you're seeing people throwing away disposable masks onto the ground and garbage. Like you're in a parking lot from in front of a shopping mall or a grocery store, you've got these disposable masks, you know, that somebody didn't put into the garbage can, they just dropped it after they finished doing their grocery shopping outside the store. And it's not nice. It's actually medical grade waste that they're throwing away. So anyways, but people started turning out these wonderful, you know, these wonderful surgical masks in large quantities. People bought them. They're not recycling them. They're just throwing them away. So unfortunately, when processes change, more waste comes about. So this is what the pandemic has caused, is actually it's created more waste, which is not necessarily a good thing. Not in all industries, but in a lot of them, because they had to change so quickly that they weren't very efficient, created waste. The good news is there's solutions to this and there's bright points. So I'm going to get to that just here. Okay. All right. So I guess the good thing or bad thing about, we call them force majeure events. So things that nobody could have predicted have happened, really not done much about. So I'll take, for example, if a meteorite struck the Earth tomorrow, okay, and happened to, I don't know, take out, I'm going to pick on, I don't know, the Solomon Islands, okay? And if you're from Solomon Islands on the call right now, I'm sorry, I just picked a random island. So a meteorite comes, it takes out Solomon Islands. Nobody could have done anything really about it right now. You couldn't have necessarily seen it coming, or if you could, you might not have been able to do something about it. Okay, that's called a force majeure event. So they're also called, in other words, acts of God, like on your insurance policy. Okay, what we'll sometimes have with these events is these will be catalysts for change in business. Some businesses will just kind of keep on going on, just doing their own thing no matter what, up until something horrible happens and they have to change in order to stay in business. Okay, this is one of those things. So the pandemic has actually been a force for change, whether businesses wanted it or not. Some businesses have been more proactive about it, so they were already in the business of change. So I'll take, for example, Apple loves rolling out new iPhones and new products. They're in the business of change. They will sell you an Amazon, I think they do Alexa. Anyways, either that's Echo. Anyways, they will send you, sell you a new personal assistant with now these wonderful new upgrades, a new Apple iPhone. They'll do all sorts of stuff. There are other businesses that they honestly will not change unless they absolutely have to, no matter what. We'll take the asphalt shingle production industry, like for your roof. There are probably some industries out there that will die making asphalt shingle. Why? Because they've been in the business for 100 years and they're not changing. Well, guess what? They've had to change. At least recently with regards to at least how they manage their workforces. But are they going to be less polluting? Probably not. But anyways, so businesses, force majeure events cause businesses to change. So how have they changed? Well, they move with regards to the demand portion to they'll market alternate products. What they will do instead is, let's say that I can no longer go to a movie. Okay. Perhaps Cineplex Odeon, what they can do is then instead move into the streaming service side. So guess what? You can now have Netflix, you can have Cineplex Odeon as a streaming service, whatever it might be. I don't know if Cineplex Odeon is thinking about this or whether they're going to wish really hard and hope things fix themselves. I'm not sure much of business plan that is, but yeah, you can try it. But other more successful ones is per se restaurants. Restaurants have been trying their best to adapt or die. So the picture on the right there, that is of the quayside on the North Shore of Vancouver. And there's restaurants and there's a public market just underneath here. It goes all the way along. So it's really been hurting up until recently, up until about July. That's when the city of North Vancouver licensed the entire facility for alcohol. So what you can do, and they've opened up all the sides to this place, so fresh air coming through. You can go down there, you can buy your fresh produce, you can grab a bite to eat at a restaurant, and they've moved tables outside, and you can wander around the entire quayside with your beer, the whole place. So you can sit out on the side of the dock with your beer in summer, eating your hot dog while you just shopped for your green produce. So that was a more, I'll call it extreme example of adaptation, but that's how that area is surviving. So they got themselves a liquor permit for the equivalent of an entire shopping mall area. So rather fascinating. Other ones have adapted. So I'm going to take case in point again of the breweries and the microbrew. They're turning out hand sanitizer. Previously, a lot of their sales went to restaurants. They've lost that stream of profit. So instead, what they've done is adapted to turning out hand sanitizer. So adapted, they're staying in business, they're not dying. Okay. There's a whole bunch of other cases that you can look at, but that's in part how they're adapting. Other ones is sometimes what they'll do is they'll do sales on specific products to get those moving, to get you thinking, I really want to buy that. In other cases, they'll do, as mentioned, at the end of the supermarket aisle, they'll have what's called the loss leader. So again, get you interested to bring you in and then get you to spend more money. Okay. There's also upstream solutions they're doing to buffer up their supply chain so they can sell you things. So adding in additional sub-suppliers. So maybe there's something you're looking to buy, okay, and the raw materials aren't available. Guess what? You're going to go find more raw material. So I'll take, for example, the toilet paper. Okay, some of the smaller sawmills in the area that supply the logs, they hired back on their nephew in order to help run the sawmill or whatever it is. Okay, so they added on additional workforces. They added on, hey, my cousin up the way also has a small sawmill that he used to run. Okay, well, start it back up again. Here we go. I'm going to buy logs from you too. Look at that. Okay. The other one is upgrading your facilities, upgrading your processes. So getting more efficient at turning the stuff out so that it can be shipped to the front lines quicker. Okay. And then also having fail safes or redundancy. So building instability. So that all of a sudden, let's say my supply of logs is no longer there for my toilet paper. That's okay. I'm sitting on 3 months worth of logs in the back lot over there. All right. Other adaptations that businesses have done in order to survive here, okay, creating alternate shipping routes, and also just plain old providing some flexibility to be able to ship, to change how you're going to get stuff from A to B. So if, for example, let's say, and it has happened, not in Canada, but other places, you have the entire dock workers union suspected of coming down with COVID, so nothing's moving off of those ships. Okay, you've got a bunch of ships coming in. What are we going to do with them? Let's move them to the next port up the way. Okay, they don't have enough capacity. We're going to move them to the next port up the way. And then I'm going to work with my trucking companies just to change where they're going to do their pickup from for the next while. So however many days it takes in order to get things back up and running. It can also mean that maybe I engage more courier companies, maybe some local guys, as opposed to a big guy like FedEx when FedEx facility comes down with COVID. Okay, we're in better position. So that flexibility is called elastic logistics. So there's more of that going on. Okay. So the other thing too is less just-in-time delivery. So just-in-time is exactly as it sounds. So things arrive and people grab it and use it. Okay. So the problem with that is that if anything goes wrong to getting you that material, you're hooped. So it means, again, they're stockpiling more, they're having more inventory on hand. Okay. As mentioned earlier, the onshoring trend. So as opposed to having things overseas, wherein if either all of a sudden the raw material dries up, or let's say I just plain old can't get it out of the country because that country wants it more than we do. Okay, having whether it's raw materials and manufacturing capacity closer to where we are, closer to where the demand is. Okay. The other stuff too is waste management, reverse logistics. So waste costs money. Okay, the problem with when you put new processes in place are inefficient. It creates waste. So either wasted time, materials, wasted whatever not. The problem with that is that you end up overpaying for either your raw materials, you end up overpaying for people's time, you end up overpaying for a whole bunch of stuff, you end up paying even plain old for cost to get rid of the stuff after. Okay, you think about things like we'll take tires off of cars. So there's been tire recycling programs in place for many, many years, and it's because the landfill says we're tired of taking this, eating up space. They're ugly, they don't break down, do something about it, we're no longer accepting them. Okay. Medical waste, that type of thing. The efficiencies are coming. You're probably noticing more cloth masks are being marketed. That's on purpose. Cloth is washable cloth. You don't have to throw it out. No government's going to come back at you right now and say, you're clogging up our landfill with disposable masks. So consumer preference is also moving as well to something that is more efficient. In most cases, again, if you're a surgeon, you probably don't want to do that. That's why there's medical grade disposable surgeon masks, but cloth masks and similar, a little bit better. Even the packaging, when you're talking about hand sanitizers, they're using a lot of the same containers and packaging that's already in place. So they're just finding ways right now to route that for recycling. So again, it's not there yet, but they're trying to find the best way to divert it so that they don't end up with somebody turning around and saying, hey, wait a minute, you're clogging up my landfill, or this is ending up being ugly on the side of the road. This isn't working. So again, as things go on, they're trying to get more efficient. It's just that first bit there when they had to move really quickly, not very efficient. So it's getting there. It's a work in progress. All right. So in conclusion, your new normal, I know it's a really catchy phrase right now. I'm not sure there's such a thing as a new normal. It's just going to be whatever it is going forward. Is going to be really a push on adaptivity with regards to supply chains, adaptivity and resiliency. So previously, wherein There may not have been built-in redundancies, where there may not have been built-in fail-safes, anything like that. People thought it was going to be clear sailing forever. Okay, guess what? It's not. So in order for businesses to survive, in order for products to continue to hit the shelves, there's going to need to be adaptivity built in. So that's going to be the new normal. And I think overall, though, we're going to be okay. We're going to be fine. Although I would recommend don't try to look for cauliflower in February when the California harvest has gone belly up. So anyways, so that concludes my talk. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jen. My power went off for about 2 minutes there, so I lost all the chat. So if you still have the chat, Art, I think you should run it, because I have a blank chat thing here from people.
Okay.
But I want the first question first. Jen, I understand a lot of stuff you get in for the telecommunications and TELUS and stuff like that comes from the Orient in the bellies of passenger planes. And there's not very many passenger planes these days. How are you handling that?
This is that elastic logistics concept. So with a lot of high value fragile materials, so we're talking about things like computer chips or telecommunication components, or even we're talking about medical grade lab equipment. Again, it's fragile. What the airlines have done, by the way, which we are starting to take advantage of, is those passenger aircraft. As you know, the aircraft industry right now, particularly the passenger one, is in a lot of trouble. Okay, I don't know if we're going to have lots of airlines go belly up, but there are some that are actually converting their passenger aircraft into cargo planes. So how do you do this? Well, what you do if you're an Airbus or a Boeing is you go to IATA, International Aircraft Transport Association, or you go to the FAA in the States, or up here, we have the equivalent, and you ask, hey, here's my plans to convert my passenger plane into a cargo plane. And it involves ripping out the seats. It involves putting in things like cargo netting and the rest, ensuring hull integrity, and then getting it approved for flight, making sure that you have pilots who are trained to fly the things, that you've just kind of changed how the weight balance works on it, and then putting it in service. So converting an aircraft, though, by the way, does take a couple of months, but that's how the aircraft industry is adapting. And we probably have had a couple of shipments, at least at my work, go on those aircraft. But that's how some of the airline industry is adapting, not all. So again, it depends upon what strategy your airline wants to use, but that's in part how it's adapting. The other way that companies are adapting is, again, it's that stockpile feature. So you order more than what you might need for a little bit, just so that you have a reserve quantity of certain things. That tends to be what a lot of industries are doing.
Thanks, Jen. Art, will you manage as I say, I have an empty chat room ever since I lost power, so please handle it.
Okay, I'm the next questioner in any event. Thank you, Jennifer. That was very interesting. Of course, while you're talking, I'm thinking of two distinct and clear areas which are under stress during this pandemic. The first is the power grid, and I know with the independent electricity system operator in Ontario that what they did was they socially isolated their individual crew shifts, the entire shift, and such that there was, in fact, 4 shifts that were in 4 different bubbles. And this way they felt that they could meet any demands that were coming on. And I thought that was kind of unique, but I try and look at that and say, how do you do that when you're you're trying to offload a ship, can you take the entire crew and bubble them? Anyway, that's just an interesting comment. When we're looking at climate change, we're also talking of very major disruptions, and I just bring Puerto Rico to mind, where absolutely everything is in demand. That the supply chains just can't handle it, let alone the ability to even discern what is necessary, and it becomes quite a disaster. Um, and so the supply chains are going to have some super resilience as we go forward. I would like to hear some of your comments on that, rather than a gentle change. This is a sharp disruption. How do you see that unfolding?
Well, I think disruptions of supply chains and its impact in regards to larger scale events, it really will vary. You have to look too at well, the stability of your normal supply chain to begin with. So if you have, let's say, a supply chain disruption in Haiti, okay, right now the supply chains in Haiti are really not good shape compared to other nations. So you take a look at what happened when they had an earthquake. So to begin with, um, their country, with regards to efficiency of getting materials to the people they needed, the stability of businesses even as a whole to be able to weather some of that was not great to begin with. And then you throw in an earthquake, okay, and you will start to have collapses in a whole bunch of areas. It's not going to be so much adaptation, it's going to be, is this thing even going to hold up? So it's what you have to start with that you're going to have to build on. So if you can build something strong in the first place or reinforce it, you're going to be in a much better shape than if you have something that is really not too good to begin with. So if you have, let's say, a nation that's been hit by a hurricane, like Mexico has recently been hit by a couple of hurricanes, there were certain areas that did a little bit better than others with regards to their supply chain resiliency. And certain spots too that did not do so well. So I'll take, for example, if you were relying upon truck transport in Mexico to get your workers to the plant, okay, and you had paved roads, you did not too bad, okay? And even if the power was out for a little bit, it's okay. It meant with you had paved roads that wouldn't wash away, that even the hydro workers could bring back up your lines. If on the other hand, you had dirt roads, a lot of those got washed away by some of the hurricanes. So it took a lot more work to repair the roads to get the workers to the plant. It took a lot more work in order for the hydro crews to get in to string back up the lines. In the meanwhile, the product from that factory wasn't getting out. Your delay to that factory could have been a day or two to string back up lines, or it could have been a couple of weeks because you had to rebuild the roads. So again, it really depends upon what state you're in to begin with.
Okay, our next question is Jean. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Jennifer, for an interesting presentation. My question is with regards to government interference, if you will, in supply management versus companies. I know companies are the ones who are supposedly in charge of their supply chains, but particularly in the case of masks in Canada, for example, there was the question of whether or not the US could interfere with 3M shipping material to Canada. And how much control is there in the supply chain with the companies or with governments?
Ooh, tricky question. Okay, most countries in time of war, in time of pandemic, in time of, I don't know, pestilence, you can call it like that too, they have the ability to enact emergency measures. Some countries will be pretty straightforward about it. Other ones, it'll be a knee-jerk reaction and it'll be quick. So there have actually, in the case of the US, yes, they can actually go in underneath Emergency Measures Act or similar and take any materials that they want. I had a case actually myself that impacted me back in, I think it was 2006. Hurricane Katrina had hit New Orleans. I was buying some giant water pumps for a water plant facility in northern Alberta. The US government decided that they needed those pumps that were just about done manufacturing to basically deflood New Orleans. So the US Army was coming in at noon on a Tuesday, and our pumps were about ready to ship out on noon on a Tuesday for the First Nations facility up in northern Alberta. So anyways, the factory called up and said, hey, we have this happening here and we're so sorry. So we said, okay, what's left to do on those pumps? They said, not much. We just have to put some stickers on the side. I said, okay, what if we had a truck show up at noon on Monday? And then you guys take lunch. We pay, and then, yeah. So anyways. So yeah, I ended up being able to get those pumps out, but it was an interesting scenario. The thing is, it was the US Army and their engineers that came in, and they were going to take every single pump in that facility, regardless of its spec or anything, and then route it to New Orleans. Mm-hmm. So did I feel bad about shorting the city of New Orleans? I don't know. It was kind of like shorting the Fort to Hawaiian First Nations.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Okay, our next question is Susan Tanner. Go ahead.
Hi, Jennifer. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, Jennifer, that was great. Really interesting. Thank you. You mentioned cauliflower in the middle of winter, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate more on food supplies, given that Canada imports over 80% of our food, and it seems to me we're a little vulnerable since we've paved over a lot of our own agriculture land.
You're right. And interestingly enough, the Canadian government has identified food security as one of their primary issues, which is why, as part of the COVID relief plan, they actually put a whole bunch of money into agricultural technology improvements. And you're right, there very much, there is a risk. But again, also it depends upon what you want to eat. Mm-hmm. So we have the unique couple of opportunities. So we're actually a net exporter of grain and pulse products. So, and we continue to be. So as long as we continue to ensure that our farmers are able to get those products to market and to processing, we should be in good shape. Also, there are certain advantages that farmers get in Canada that actually push them, if they can, to produce more. So I'll take the farm agricultural credit. So if you own a farm, you actually get quite a variety of tax breaks from the Canadian government. It's just a matter of knowing where to look. Out here in BC, we have what's called the blueberry farm scam. I don't know if you've heard of this. But wherein there is land set out in BC, you can't use it for anything other than agricultural use. It's called ALR, so Agricultural Land Reserve. So I'm not sure if there's anything similar in Ontario, but it says that that land is to be used for agricultural use only. Well, there are people that come to Canada with a lot of money, and then they decide to put their very large new house on a farm. And how they do this is they decide to grow blueberries. Bushes take 6 years in order to mature and produce blueberries. So for 6 years, you can watch those things either grow or die. And you have your wonderful 20,000 square foot house with you and your closest family members, and you get the tax breaks. So right now the BC government is actually cracking down on that. So because they said, no, we need food actually being grown. So no, you cannot put your 20,000 square foot house with a tennis court on it.
Mm-hmm. So would you recommend what foods we may or may not be able to have? Like pulses and grains, that's one thing. Vegetables?
Vegetables, actually, again, it depends upon what you want to eat, but greenhouse technology is coming a long way. So provided that you're willing to invest in that, and again, there's government grants for that, you'll be okay. Although right now there are certain products that actually make more money than others when you're talking about greenhouses. So tomatoes, we can get tomatoes if you want to look for it year round in Canada. And it's because there's farmers out in BC who they have greenhouses full of peppers and tomatoes. These are cash crops. So they make good cash off of them. And they grow them year round. And actually they're heated, for the most part, they're heated with natural gas.
Oh,
Yeah. So not the best fossil fuel to use, but not the worst one. But if you grow them year round, you can actually make it more efficient. There's actually what's called Internet of Things. This is the technology occurring that will help automate your greenhouse use and efficiencies for heat. So it'll tell, I've got too much heat in here, turn on the thermostat, open up the vents to my greenhouse so my crops are growing ideally. When it gets too close, that stuff will automatically close greenhouse vents and turn up. So kind of like your home thermostat, the programmable ones. Yeah, very smart, but it's got that additional function of opening up greenhouses and louver it. It can also do things like tell you when too much moisture in here, not enough. So all sorts of funky stuff.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question is Susha Man. Susha, go ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very nice. Excellent presentation to provoke our mind to think around a few things. So, a couple of questions. Do they refill the beer bottles locally?
Yes, actually. When you're talking about especially mid-size and microbrews, so not your Labatt's or your Moose Heads, but yeah, the small guys, they enjoy getting it back because they're not stuck with a fee to pay for somebody else to wash and clean their bottles. So if you bring back, they have these things called growlers when you're talking about microbrew companies. They're about, I'd say probably about the size of, I think of something comparable. The size of a small backpack. And you can get that thing filled with beer. And you take it home and they give you a pump and you can get out however much you want. With those ones there, they especially love it because they get maximum profit for it. You bring it back, they fill the thing with, take it away, wash it, give you a washed container, fill it with beer, and then you take it away again. They save tons on money doing that. So very much so.
So related with that, how about we force all the beer, wine, and whiskey and whatever, that they should use standard tables, standard bottles for that kind of a thing. So the local manufacturer can just reuse those bottles, which may have paper labels, and that can be removed.
That's a great idea. I think that a lot of them are trying. The issue has been up until recently that it's cheaper to send the stuff overseas or somewhere else in order to get ground down and made into new bottles, versus having a wholesaler take it back in and then recycle it into other stuff. There is some of it that they do that with, but there's still a larger portion that they don't yet for the large guys. And it's because in part, it's just been cheaper up until now.
Right, that's because we didn't have a standard imposed on these alcohol stuff. But if they reuse the bottles rather than buying a new one, that will be a win-win for economics as well as for the environment.
Exactly. So capacity has to be built to do that. So somebody can do it.
Now, with respect to the air industry, aviation, now most of the aircrafts are standing idle, and most of the pilots are unemployed, and the oil is cheaper. I'm just wondering whether we're going to get much cheaper global or air parcels coming through.
Not right now, because there's a bottleneck occurring. There's only so many cargo planes out there. So until we have more cargo planes available and the demand either levels off or drops a little bit, it's probably still going to be pretty pricey. There's also only so many pilots trained in flying cargo. Um, Although even if I take a passenger plane and convert it to a cargo plane, it changes how that thing flies. As I understand it, it's because of how the weight sits. I don't know if you've ever been on a plane, especially a small plane, where they tell you, I'm sorry, you have to change seats, you're going to unbalance the plane. Okay, that's in part why they need to retrain the pilots in order to fly cargo, because you stuff that thing with a different type of weight balance. So I guess it functions differently. So they have to send the pilots for retraining.
I can answer a little bit of that. I've flown for quite a number of years as crew, and it's takeoff and landing. When you're heavily loaded, takeoff is very different than when you're hauling passengers and you got a heavy load, and the same with landing. In any event, our next question is Cameron. Do you want to go ahead, Cameron?
Yes, thank you. Jennifer, wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you for that. My question is, although these black swan events are a surprise and shock to the system, at least in my opinion, they are not incalculable. So my question is there an organization that takes heed of the global supply chain and monitors and advises on disruptions?
I don't think there's a single one, although various supply chain organizations globally do track certain metrics and factors. So I'm a member of one. It's called the Institute for Supply Management. There's other ones out there, though, called one's called APIX. There's other ones called SCMA. There's another one called SIPS. But what they will do is actually they'll monitor certain factors, primarily associated with supply and demand. So right now, what some of the trends are telling us out of that data is that manufacturing backlog, and they survey actually whole industries. So what they'll do is they'll indicate, such as right now, the computer electronics industry actually has a huge backlog in orders that they're busy working their way through. So, and it's gone up 6 points since last quarter, although it's dropped down from a higher level earlier in the year. So that's the type of statistics that they monitor and that can be used in order to put plans in place, or at least kind of see what's coming, so that if you look at it correctly, you can gauge a little bit about where you need to be worried and what you need to do about it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Our next question is from Jean. Jean, go ahead.
It's sort of a follow-up to my first question, as well as sort of what Cameron was alluding to. It's sort of control of the supply chains and being aware of what's about to happen or is happening. So he asked if there was an organization that monitors this, but are there government agencies that are going to, that you know of now, that have been set up with in Canada in particular, the federal government, to circumvent some of these things where we realize that we've only got a very fragile supply system? Do you know if we've put more redundancies in place?
There is something that the government does have. It's called the strategic stockpile. Have you heard of that?
Yes, especially for drugs. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Canada does have a couple things, and it mostly falls underneath the Emergency Measures Act that looks at critical things for possible force majeure events. So it includes everything from having stockpiles of, I'm trying to think here. If you happen to live in the area of the Bruce nuclear power plant, from what I hear, every couple of years, if you're in that surrounding radius, they send you out iodine tablets, just in case anything ever happens, okay? Now, I'm sure if you move into the area and you were to where there's a power plant there, you'd probably be kind of shocked when you get that in the mail. But anyway, that, and undoubtedly, probably somewhere housed, likely along with other things, is additional supplies of iodine tablets. There's other things too, such as when you're looking at, I hate to think about it, civil insurrection, invasion, or similar, the military sits on stockpiles of certain things. So there's armories in various cities and outside certain areas that are maintained and are stocked. Sometimes people do fall down. It's kind of like a grocery list. Sometimes somebody forgets something. Let's just hope it's not something important, but that's the type of preparation in place. Businesses also are required to have certain things in place depending upon what you are. So certain businesses, since they're considered to be critical infrastructure, are required to have emergency plans in place and show that they have things in place. I work right now for one of those areas. So telecommunication infrastructure is considered vital to the country. So if anything goes sideways, there's certain things that we're required to do, have for business continuity in place. Other ones are banks, so money system, in case that collapses. You've heard about the bank runs in 1920s where the economy collapsed and everybody went to clean up their bank accounts and the economy went, yeah, okay, banks, they have to keep a certain infrastructure and security level in place. Electricity, food stock and supply, which actually right now is one of the things pandemic's triggering, food stock and supply. Water, sewer, excuse me, there's required business continuity plans and certain stockpiles of materials for forecast disasters to happen that need to be in place. And government agencies actually do test those critical infrastructure areas on a regular basis. They have rotating schedules they do this with.
Okay, so the government's sort of working hand in hand with the organizations or the businesses in these critical places.
Yeah, if your name is Toys R Us, though, I'm sorry, you're on your own here. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Depends how old your children are, whether or not that's a critical infrastructure. But anyway, thank you, Jennifer. That answers my question. Yeah.
I have one last question before we wind this up. That is with regards to having transportation priority. I keep thinking back on the Puerto Rico example where there's limited port facilities and airport access, etc. Everything is down, and but yet there has to be, some shipping getting in and out, and food, for example, would be a very high priority payload. Is there such a priority scheme already in place, or have people practiced it? Because, boy, in my mind, it's sorely needed.
So in specific to Puerto Rico or more in general?
Oh, in general, because Puerto Rico could happen anywhere in the globe,
Yeah, sometimes what can happen is, yes, portions of your logistics supply chain can get cut off. In which case there are usually, I'm going to say usually, backup plans. Now, whether those plans function as designed or not, that's another question. Puerto Rico, if I remember right, there's a hurricane that came through. They were expecting help from the US government. They had disruption regarding food, medicine, help to get the power back up. I'm not sure it's a lack of having a plan. I think my perspective, it was a lack of execution of the plan, or somebody hadn't updated the plan, or somebody had kind of like with the grocery list, somebody left something off the plan. That's my perspective on it. But again, plans only work if you follow them, you plan for them, and then you execute them.
Okay, Ted, do you want to wind up?
If I have a connection, yes. I still don't have the chat, though I got one line from you saying what I say thank you to Jen. And yeah, Jen, that was terrific. It makes you want to travel again to go and find out where all these places come from, where stuff comes from. I just had one comment where I'd add something that many years ago, we looked at what would happen if Canada couldn't really import stuff in winter. What was amazing, and this comes back to an answer that a couple of people gave, was that it depends on what you eat. A lot of us like orange juice for breakfast, but you can get exactly the same nutritional benefits from turnips. They don't taste that great, but if you put enough beet sugar on them, you might at least be palatable. So,
I apple juice, actually. We produce a lot of apples. So.
Okay, yes, we do indeed. And substitution, as you've quite rightfully noted, is very important. Having contingency plans. And we didn't ask her, and if she wants to talk about it lately, what happens with bringing in 5G from China. That's also a rather interesting issue she's been dealing with, but we'll probably do that offline. So thank you again, Jen, for a very interesting presentation.
You're most welcome, and thank you for inviting me.